third-party content has been copied and communicated pursuant to Part 5A or 5B of the Copyright Act, unless indicated otherwise.
All right, it's 9 o'clock, so let's make a start. Welcome everyone to Philosophy, Love, Sex and Death. On a Monday morning, the first day of semester, on a Moomba Monday, which of course means what? Let's get together and have fun in the Indigenous language. So maybe we can find a way to link that to the topics. My name is Themi. You can contact me on my email, my phone. Facebook's also good for private messages if that's your preferred method of contact. I'll be doing the Monday morning lectures and the toots at 11 a.m. in room IB3 108. Hi. Petra will be doing the rest of the toots on Tuesday. That's Petra down the front there, who's turning up just to see what's going on, so she knows roughly where you're all going to be at. Essay 1 will be due April 19, so that's about a month's time. There's plenty of time if you attend everything. And that's a key point, I think, is to attend everything. Now, Deakin's very good with all its online stuff, right? These lectures will be online at some point after they're delivered, not before. There's a recording of the lecture which will also be online, which is recording right now if this mic is working properly, and I'm sure it is. Testing, yeah. But that's for backup, and that's just to consolidate what you see in the lecture theatres and what you see in the tutorials. So when you go home, you do the reading, you go through the lectures, you read the material, you take notes, you formulate questions, you ask them in the lecture theatre. I don't mind questions and interjections. I think it adds a bit of atmosphere. You know, you're at university now, so it's good to have a bit of participation. It's no longer VCE. Thank Christ, most of you are probably saying. And the toots too. If you turn up to the toots and you've done the reading, you've gone through the lectures, you've attended lectures, you're going to have a really good experience. You're going to have the full experience. So the online stuff is there for backup, and it's very good for backup and to consolidate your study, but make sure you attend everything, and by the time the essays come, you've got a whole journal full of notes and ideas, good ideas, which are going to help you write the essays and also help you develop good ideas for these big meaningful issues that we're going to deal with in this topic. Love, sex and death. Can you get three bigger signifiers loaded and crashed together than love, sex and death? But does anyone know what's death doing there? Because one of the set texts is this one here by Raja Harwani, which is called Love, Sex and Marriage. So why has death been substituted for marriage? Yeah? Yeah, they're both inevitable. Oh yeah. Death's inevitable. Marriage is an option, so it's not as disturbing or not as big a deal. Yeah. Is marriage death in some way? Can it represent death sentence to some? That's right. Yeah. Maybe death of one side of ourselves, but also the birth of another. So the idea of and the questions of marriage that are going to come up in this course are really interesting and profound and complicated. Gay marriage, polygamous marriage, no marriage. Harwani runs some pretty anti-marriage arguments by the end. He thinks the whole institution of marriage is massively overrated in some senses. But it's not as if he totally dismisses marriage or anything all the way through. Like, he does sort of have a way of painstakingly working out arguments and logic chopping and dealing with opposing arguments and outlining them carefully before he evaluates them. And it can be a bit of a sort of torturous path at times, but especially for first subject of a first year, it's kind of good practice to just get into the habit of outlining a position, understanding it, showing you understanding it, and then evaluating it. The better you understand it, the better your evaluation of it will be. Both sides are important. And I've done some tutoring of VCE philosophy, and I think one of the key structures of the questions are So outline and evaluate Nietzsche's position on morality. Outline and evaluate Aristotle's notion of the good life. So it's always outline and evaluate. Understand it, then comment. So there's two sides always. Here we have an interesting picture. This is from, yes, before I get to that though, all info is on Cloud Deakin. Essay questions, discussion boards, check it every day for everything. That should be your home base. When you're ready to do some research, do some study, homework, as it used to be called in high school, log into Cloud Deakin. Start talking on the discussion boards. Either myself or Petra or Patrick Stokes, who's the unit chair, who's doing the Burwood lectures and the online stuff, will be answering all the little technical questions, and you'll be able to answer each other's questions too, get a bit of a sort of cafe or agora system going, where you're all just sort of bouncing around ideas. Okay, now to this famous picture. Has anyone seen it before? Yeah? What do you know of it?
I think it's sort of in the National Gallery, Australia. They had it I can't remember what was meant to be, but I remember seeing it.
Oh, right, really? Like a picture of it, or because it's a wall painting, so I don't think they'll be able to.
It was a picture of it.
A picture of it. Oh, yeah, great. Do you remember what it said about it?
Not really. I went there like 5 years ago.
5 years ago. Excellent. This is the famous scene of the abduction of Persephone, or the abduction of Cordy. Cordy means girl in Greek, by Hades, who is the god of death. And this was meant to be how Hades and Persephone got married. She was Cordy, but then she got abducted by Hades, married, and then became Persephone, goddess of the underworld, where she reigned as queen of the underworld, with Hades, who's the king of the underworld. But there was a whole drama involved where Demeter, the mother of Persephone, and a kind of earth goddess, wasn't happy about this abduction, and she refused to let anything grow until she got her daughter back. So there was this big sort of drama where Zeus had to step in. Zeus is the father of Persephone, and broker a deal and say Persephone can return in the spring, but in winter she has to go back under. And it sort of, in some ways, explains why the fields go fallow every winter and then regenerate every spring. So right now there's the flowers blooming in Eleusis, because Greece is going through spring right now as we head into autumn. And that means Persephone is returning to Demeter, so Demeter's letting stuff grow. So, in a sense, what we have there is love, sex, and death all linked together, and that's why I sort of chose this picture, because Hades abducted Persephone because he was just absolutely besotted by her beauty. She was in the meadow picking flowers, and he was just overcome. Right? Infatuation, sex, love, they end up getting married, and there's questions over whether Persephone cried out, "Help, I'm being abducted," or "We hear, I'm finally free of my mother." So there's always been that debate in the literature. If you're getting into like interpreting myths and the different ways they're invested, that's one of the sort of issues. Death. Hades is the god of death. Now, it doesn't mean he's like some kind of ghoul. It's not sort of like, he's not Satan or anything. He's not Christianity. But still, it's not the most ennobling part of life, that things die, that we will die, that people we know will die. So there's trauma involved. And even our relationships, sometimes they die, right? You've got breakups, you've got loss, you've got misunderstandings. So there's little metaphorical deaths involved. So love, sex, death. And here we have Alexander choosing this painting, commissioning this painting for his father's tomb, Philip of Macedon. Philip was the first king to actually unify the city-states of Greece after centuries, brilliant centuries, but where they were always fighting. And there were about there were only two reasons before that for them to stop fighting. One was the Lucian Mysteries, where it was a nationwide sort of holiday where they all got together to commemorate Persephone's abduction and return to Demeter. They all stopped fighting for this. That was one reason. Second reason was the Olympic Games. So this is a fundamental kind of passage of right story and myth and key aspect of the religion. for the ancient Greeks, a very sort of profound culture in a lot of ways. Love, sex and death. Alexander commissions this for his father's tomb. A lot of tension between him and his father, because there was a lot of tension between his father and his mother. Some speculated that Alexander and his mother were behind the assassination of Philip, although Aristotle thinks it was probably the Persians trying to cause it, because they were about to invade Persia and finally overthrow their hegemony. But maybe even some of the ambivalence of the son towards his father is coming out in this painting. Maybe Alexander seeing his father Philip abducting his mother. Who knows? A loaded signifier like this can be invested in many ways. Love, sex and death, loaded. Okay, well, while we're on the topic of the Greeks, we're going to deal with the first recommended reading, which is Plato's Symposium. And this is available free. This one over here by Hawani is the second recommended reading, and we'll come to that midway through this lecture. So I'll just get that off for now and bring it back later. But the first recommended text for this topic is Plato's Symposium, available free at our library, which is good, as an ebook. But you can buy it as well if you want. It's up to you. Now, Plato's Symposium, written in about 370 BC. So this is about 30 years before Alexander builds this tomb for Philip. But it's also about 30 years after what's known as the Golden Age of Greece, or the Golden Age of Athens, because in the last 40 years of the 5th century BC, so from 440 to 400 BC, Athens and Sparta had their massively destructive war where everyone got involved. Every Greek city-state was either on the Athens side or the Spartan side. So it was nationwide. Very destructive. Athens ended up losing because Pericles ended up dying, and Sparta ruled the roost from then on, until Thebes took over, maybe around this time. Thebes actually got up and won the Premiership Cup. And then by about 330, Philip and Alexander from Macedonia, the northern province of Greece, ended up taking over and then going east and conquering Persia. So Plato's writing this in 370 BC, but it's about a drinking party that the enigmatic Socrates, the philosopher Socrates, attended in 416 BC. And at this drinking party, a topic was proposed for discussion, because they didn't just get together and drink and just make, crass comments or watch TV or listen to loud music. I'm sure they did all that too, but the whole purpose of a symposium was to wet the whistle a little bit and then have a philosophical discussion, take it in turns. And the topic was love. Let's discuss the nature of love. What is love? Does anyone know what love is? You know what love is? Excellent.
I've read that.
You've read Symposium?
Yeah.
Yeah?
But they describe it in many different ways through it.
Sorry?
One of the ways they describe it is that we used to be attached with 2 heads, 4 arms and 4 legs, and that we're just, Zeus got angry because we were too powerful and cut us in half, and then we're just looking for our half. But I can't remember how Socrates described it.
The myth you're talking about is by Aristophanes, who's like he's almost like the town jester. I was going to say gesture, a lot of gestures in there, but town jester. So in a way, he's almost like the Seth MacFarlane of ancient Athens, an absolute scoundrel. He gets up there and he hangs shit on absolutely everyone, including Socrates, and they don't know whether to arrest him or call him genius. Just like Seth MacFarlane, if you look at all the reviews, it's like, arrest him, what a scoundrel, put him in the stocks. No, I thought he was great. He was so funny. Finally, I watched the Oscars for the first time. So he has that kind of effect. And he's there at this symposium, even though he's sort of seen as responsible for ridiculing Socrates to the extent that he turned Athens against Socrates. Because Socrates ends up before the courts himself at some point. But Aristophanes will tell this story that you mentioned about us originally being fused into one sort of primordial shape, 2 people in one. And Zeus split us in half because we're getting too cocky for our own good. and we try to take over the gods. And so love is about us trying to find this missing other half, which might sound a bit conventional, except because it's ancient Greece and heteronormativity doesn't exist in the way it does for us in this post-Christian society. There were male-female unities that were split, so they're the heteros, looking for the other halves. But there were also guy-guy unities that were split, they're the gay males, and girl-girl unities that were split, they're the gay females, lesbians. So this is very interesting when we come to debates later on about gay marriage. Should it exist? Is homosexuality natural? Is it unnatural? You know, is it right? Is it wrong? Is to just have a look at the way the ancient Greeks did it. The institution of marriage was primary, but bisexuality, there was a place for it. So it was very liberal with respect to that as well. It was almost encouraged between men.
They were speaking in that, they speak about love between males being the highest form of love.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it shouldn't be open or something.
So it's kind of scandalous if you compare it to our society. And that's just Athens. If you look at somewhere like Sparta, it was compulsory. Compulsory homosexuality between the men. They left that out of that 300 film because they wanted to, they thought, you can't have like strong, muscly men who are also, doing each other doggy style in the mess hall they were in home. But it's not as if they didn't have wives too. It's just, that was just part of the bonding between the men. That's part of friendship. So what does Socrates say when this topic is raised at the symposium? Let's discuss love. Socrates says, I understand nothing but love matters, actually. Which is a big claim. He's the great philosopher, and he's saying, actually, there's only one thing I really know about. Everything else I say is as disputable as a dream. So this is a big call by Socrates. Doesn't mean in other dialogues you won't hear him claiming to know all sorts of other stuff. And even in this dialogue, there's points where he starts claiming all sorts of other stuff, but he's also saying, but that stuff, in a sense, is as disputable as a dream. Like if you say to somebody, like if I was to say to you, hey, I've seen the light, I've seen, last night I had a dream of God, and now it's true. Aren't you going to say to me, yeah, but did you see it or did you dream it, right? So that's sort of what Socrates is sort of saying there. My religious, mystical kind of thoughts, they're as disputable as a dream. I can't prove it. But what I can show you is that I understand love. Massive call. What does Lacan say? Now, occasionally I'll bring in people like Lacan and Nietzsche or Heidegger or whoever, and that's just because they're in my field of expertise. That's what I did my PhD on. That's what I'm published on. Doesn't mean you have to know these outside sources. They're just there to add a bit of icing on the cake and stimulate sort of your thoughts a little bit more. The only thing you really have to know is readings with an R next to it, recommended readings. But let's have a look at what Lacan says anyway. He's a French psychoanalyst from the French postmodern, post-structuralist kind of intellectual milieu, post-war in Paris. We have a course on that as well, if you want to do that in future semesters, called Freedom and Subjectivity, which deals with that milieu. But Lacan says, Socrates is the longest transference the history of thought has known. He claims to know nothing but to be able to recognise infallibly where the lover is and where the beloved. The lover is the one who pursues, who directs their desire towards the object. The beloved is the one who receives those advances. Lover and beloved. Socrates is saying, basically, I know who likes who. That's all I know. I know who likes who, but everyone ends up liking him as the one supposed to know. And that's what the transference is, when you transfer your authority for thinking to someone. From the psychoanalytic paradigm, it's sort of based on when you're growing up and your parents are the primary carer. You look to them to teach you, to feed you. They have your authority. You give them the authority for your thinking. And as we go on in life, that sort of changes. It changes to teachers, public figures, philosophers, depending on who you are. An older friend, it could be anyone, an older sibling, a cousin, transference. Socrates is the longest we've ever known, because if you look at somebody like, I think his name was Alfred North Whitehead, he says, I think it was Whitehead, he said, philosophy is just a footnote to Plato. So what he's saying is basically for 2,000 years, we're just following in the footsteps of what Plato did. Plato set the scene, and we would never quite make it out of that arena. until people like Nietzsche and the postmodernists come along and the deconstructionists who start to challenge and question some of those sort of frameworking assumptions. Speaking of Nietzsche, he says, how did the most beautiful growth of antiquity, Plato, contract such a disease, this transference of authority, this belief in Socrates? Did the wicked Socrates corrupt him after all? So you can already see Nietzsche starting to challenge what Plato and Socrates are going to set in motion. Because we only know about Socrates primarily because Plato wrote about him. As a rough analogy, I won't push it too far, but we know about Jesus from what the gospel writers wrote about him, from how Paul founded the first Christian church. It's a little bit like that with Plato and Socrates. Socrates did not write, refused to write. He will just speak. He will just turn up in your agora and ask funny questions, like he'd go to the shoemaker and say, what's the shoe? What is a shoe? We just kept asking these what is questions and get people to realise that they couldn't actually define things as well as they thought they could. Nietzsche's critique. Socrates was the agent and symptom of the dissolution of Greece. So another strong critique. Why symptom? Because this destructive war between Athens and Sparta is already tearing it apart. Why agent, as in cause? Because he offers his beliefs as a cure, and it's not really. He gets us trapped in what he calls the anti-nature religions, because he thinks Christianity is a Platonism for the masses. So he thinks what Plato and Socrates do, leave us prey to religion by inventing this idea of the pure spirit and the good that's opposite to nature, opposite to the earth, beyond the senses, accessible in the afterlife. So that's one of the things that's surprising about Plato and Socrates. And you think, okay, we're at the beginning of philosophy. Oh my God, he sounds like a Christian church father. So there is that element where Plato and Socrates speculate about immortal souls and afterlives. You go to heaven if you're good, you go to hell if you're bad. And they get this from the Pythagoreans and the Orphic traditions that existed as a minor current in Greece. Plato and Socrates basically take this minor sort of Puritan psychology and amplify it, because they've seen Greece tear itself apart, so they think their answer is turn away from the natural drives and instincts. Let's put a lid on it all. So, what we have here is a massive dispute over the ethics of desire, all right? A massive dispute, and it runs through the whole history of Western thought. The belief in the supernatural good and immortal soul makes us moral, say Plato, Socrates, and the Christians, right? Versus the decline thesis, say like from Nietzsche and Heidegger. This is the beginning of the end. Western metaphysics is a history of neurosis, repression, illusion, delusion. There's no such thing as this good above the senses, outside of life, beyond the earth, behind the stars. We're just kidding ourselves. And it's uprooting us, making us forget the real truth of being, which is time, change, flow, right? Opposite to the dogmatist error. And so, no, we know this is true and it's true forever. It's the eternal. So this is a massive kind of dispute that emerges. And it's based on how do we regulate or comport ourselves towards our natural drives and instincts, towards our desires, be them sexual ones or aggressive ones, or even other passions like love. Do we just say, no, they're all good, nature is good, let's just go for them? Or do we say, no, they can lead to evil and trouble and war and depression and disaster. Let's turn away and look for something spiritual to escape. I'm going to posit as an early possible solution the Delphic maxim, right? Nothing in excess, miden agan. Neither nature nor its denial. So don't just do whatever your instincts say, because sometimes they can lead to no good. Sometimes they can lead to excess. But don't turn away from them all the time. That can make you ill and crippled and sick, and there's a lot of positivity in the drives too. So look for the mean. Nothing in excess. And that includes moderation. So there is times where you let your drives go and have some excess. So nothing in moderation, including moderation itself. I've written here like the Apollo-Dionysus cycle. And if you look at the note, because I think it was every winter, Apollo, the god of form, structure, reason, he'd take a break from the Temple of Delphi, and Dionysus would take over, the god of excess, wine, intoxication, frenzy, orgiastic dancing and activity, sexual activity. So even moderation has to be moderated. So it's a very interesting ethical maxim that comes from Delphi, almost self-correcting. Nothing in excess, including moderation itself. And the other key Delphic maxim is know thyself, γνώθησε αυτόν. These are written on the walls by the ancient sages. In order to get the balance right, you've got to know yourself, you've got to look within. So that's why it's very important as you read this stuff, keep a journal, take notes, read, underline, come up with like formulations, question yourself, question ideas, know yourself, look for the mean. Here's a little visual reminder. That's the Temple of Delphi. So if you go there today, these are sort of the remains of it. And we're going to look at the Symposium now from this perspective. Sophrosini, trying to look for the mean. A Greek philosophical term meaning healthy-mindedness, self-control and moderation guided by knowledge and balance, expressed by the two most famous sayings of the Oracle of Delphi. Nothing in excess and know thyself. All right, now into the Symposium. Firstly, the speeches prior to Socrates, because they're going to go around the circle, and Socrates isn't sitting first, so all these other guys are going to have the first crack. Phaedrus, one character. Love is a great god. So trying to answer this question, what is love? Love is a great god, the greatest god of all. The Muhammad Ali of gods, right? I am the greatest. That's what Phaedrus thinks. That's what love is. But it occurs when the beloved, the eromenos, the passive object of desire, reciprocates for the lover, the erastus, active producer of initial desire. So the erastus goes to someone, I love you, I desire you, but it's not love until the beloved returns serve and says, I love you too, which is always the climax of every rom-com, right? That's when the miracle of love is meant to occur. That's what Phaedrus says, and that's, I think, an important distinction. The lover and the beloved, the erastus and the eromenos. Pausanias is next. He says, no, love, or eros, the Greek term for it, he's not one god, he's two. He's two gods. And that's because there's two Aphrodites. One high, the spiritual, male, the one broaching the eternal moral good, and the one low, the one that's bodily, sensual, base, transient, female. So you can see almost an initial kind of, patriarchal, sexist almost sort of tinge to what Pausanias is saying. Male is better because it's connected to reason, spirit, higher, lofty. Female is lower because it's connected to body, sensuality, change. So we can see that prejudice there in Pausanias. Some speculate that this is Plato's view being expressed. Others dispute that. So that's one of the interesting questions there. But he thinks there's two Aphrodites, and again, he says the one that's high is high because she didn't have a mother. She was born straight from a male. I think it was because Kronos either sliced his father's testy off or got his own sliced off in order for there to be a changing of the guard, which I think was Zeus's father. And that egg hit the ocean and foam came out. I guess it's a kind of semen metaphor. And that's where the apparently high Aphrodite came from. So you can see this sort of strain in Pausanias. He's trying to get a Puritan psychology going, but even his high Aphrodite is connected to this like scandalous scene of a god getting castrated and his testy exploding semen all over the sea. So it doesn't really sound that high and lofty anyway. And that's the sort of issue with ancient Greek religion, is that it doesn't allow for Puritan psychology that easily. So Plato and Socrates are always trying to stretch it in that direction. And one of the things Socrates eventually gets convicted for is blasphemy. So that's where that comes from. But Eryximachos is next, the doctor, the physiologist. He says, I agree there's two types of love, but I'm going to differentiate them in terms of bodily health. The ones that some are good for you should be encouraged, some are bad for you, they shouldn't be encouraged. Then there's Aristophanes, which was mentioned at the front here, who says, I'll tell you what love is. We're initially this creature fused into one. we're split in two, and we're going around looking for our other halves. And he goes into details about the genital function and how Apollo came and re-screwed our genitals from back to front so that we can perform a sort of sexual function when we see us. And you can see how Aristophanes has the license, the jester's license, to make comic references to the genitive functions. Just like Seth MacFarlane's boob song at the Oscars. Like, not even everyone can just come up and make reference to that. But the jester sort of has a license, and that's Aristophanes' role here and abroad. Agathon, the host, hyper-eulogizes love. It's the best god ever. Took over the others, made them peaceful and kindly. I write there really, because is that what the ancient Greek gods are like? Zeus and Hera and Apollo and Aphrodite, fighting, complaining, scheming, like the ancient Greek gods are gods of passions. So, but these guys are, because Plato's writing it, are always trying to stretch it into a more moralistic direction. Agathon's even rebuked by Socrates for being too superficial. Like, you're just trying to be a happy host, say all the nice things, but really you're just talking shit. But now it's Socrates' turn. So that's Aphrodite on the left. You can note the proud displays of beauty. So this is an actual statue from 225 BC. Aphrodite Gallipygos, of the beautiful buttock. So when we see these later debates about the sexualization of culture and raunch culture and objectification, it's the media's fault, it's capitalism's fault, just take a bit of a historical perspective and say, they didn't have the media here, or they didn't have capitalism here, they didn't have, maybe there's something natural about expressions of somatic beauty. So keep that in mind. And that's Eros, who's traditionally known as the son of Aphrodite. The Romans called Eros Cupid, and Aphrodite Venus. They basically just adopted the Greek gods. But there's other myths, I think, from Hesiod, where it has love as something a bit more primordial, one of the original gods that gave birth to the other gods. So ancient Greek religion wasn't dogmatic and fixed. You always get you always get variance. There's no so there's space in there for you to weave your own sort of thoughts and desire into. All right, so what's Socrates going to say? He says to Agathon, look, mate, love cannot be a god, because a god must always be perfect, he must always be behaved, he must always be fulsome and never lacking or desperate or wanton like a lover on the hunt for his beloved. That's not what gods are like. Gods are pure, perfect. So Socrates is already trying to reinvent Greek religion, trying to transform it. And he says, love must therefore be between the two, between being mortal and divine, between the loved and the beloved, the erastes and the eromenos. He's trying to explain that when you do love somebody, you tend to idealise them and make them seem really perfect. And in that sense, they seem really divine and heaven-blessed. That's the words that Plato uses. So he's trying to explain why the lover, the one pursuing, looks like a dog on the hunt. So that must be the mortal side, because humans are all wretched, evil creatures. While the beloved looks like this perfect, amazing, overvaluated, idealised object. That must be the part that's close to the gods. But really love's in between the two, because love is the reciprocation of these high and the low, the lover and the beloved. So love is in between the two. That's Socrates' answer. Now, to prove it, which of course is as disputable as a dream, he's going to make up two stories given to him by a mystical woman called Diotima, who tells two stories. I said potentially just made up by Plato here, because Lacan's done a close reading of this dialogue, and he says, look, I've surveyed the literature and I don't see these myths appearing anywhere else. So Plato's just going to make them up and say, the first story is Poros and Pinea. He goes, the reason why love is between the two, mortal and divine, is because his father was Poros, meaning ways, means, resources. I have full resources at your disposal. But the mother was Pinea, meaning desperate, impoverished, lack. Note, given the female gender as well, which sort of sees that initial prejudice, which people like Derrida will take Plato to task for later on in the postmodern epoch. So love is between having means and lacking them, between divine and mortal, as a daimon, which is an intermediary spirit. So love provides a kind of traffic between the low and the high for us, between the mortal and the base, and the spiritual and the divine. His second myth to explain this is the ladder of love. Love is thus an ascent from the earthly mortal lacking, the penia erastasite, to the fulsome, divine, beautiful in itself and perfect, supernatural being. I can almost get up on the desk to like say how high he's like, you know, making this like idea of the good. It's almost like a proto-Christian version of you know, the Father who is in heaven. Doesn't call it the Father, just calls it Theos, the God. Petra's got some expertise in theology, so she'll be able to tell you all about Theos and theology as well. That's the ladder of love, right? So note how on the front book, on the front cover of the second recommended reading for this week, which is chapter 1 of this book, we have a ladder there. And so, does this represent the ladder of love in Plato, Socrates and Diotima? Because Hawani will refer to the Symposium, as we shall see, which is why we're going through it first. But also note, the ladder is up against the window. Why is that? Is that for voyeurism? And don't forget, whenever there's a voyeur, there's sometimes also an exhibitionist as well. So remember, there's two sides of that coin. Is it reference to the perversions, or just someone working, which requires renunciation of all our drives? For instance, if we were just going to act out our drives now, we wouldn't be dealing with texts and ideas. We'd be out drinking or partying or recovering from doing that on a Sunday night. I'm glad we're all not, because there's more to life. All that stuff's good, but Dionysus isn't the only god in town, and neither is Aphrodite. Hawani will treat these issues at length. Let's have a closer look at Diotima's ladder of love. First, she says, this is Socrates retelling what she told him, first one notes the beauty of a particular physical body. He's hot, she's pretty, etc. Then one notes the beauty of others as well. You know, what is this thing called beauty? Well, there's many beauties, right? There must be this thing called beauty in general. So we're getting into the realm of abstract properties now. And then you can abstract even further, says Socrates, via Diotima, to spiritual, ideational, or non-physical, or non-material beauties, like the beauty of a great work of poetry, right? The beauty of like great law and governance, a system of government, one that works and keeps harmony in the city. Bodies of knowledge, with all the various sciences. Don't they have this sort of a beauty to them? And last and best of all, the beauty of profound philosophies touching the supernatural moral good itself. So again, we're using this abstraction to get higher and higher and higher towards the sovereign good, which sort of crowns the whole ideational structure of Platonism. Note there's still a role for beauty of bodies there, because it's still ancient Greece. It's not medieval Christianity just yet, where you'll get sort of movements which doesn't want a role for beauty at all. It's like beauty, flesh, sin, hell. No more questions. But then again, there's movements within Christianity to say, no, we're all God's creation. You know, nature was also created by God, and you get all those intelligent design sort of stories emerging as well. But you won't get this in sort of pre-Platonic Greece so much. So this is actually revolutionary, what Plato and Socrates are doing here, for better or for worse. Some like it, some don't, as I said at the start. Let's look at some problems. Problems of binary thinking. Thinking in terms of split opposites. There's good, then there's evil. Nothing in between, right? The bottom of the ladder is evil, the top is good. As if evil is in the flesh and the matter, and spirit or ideas is wholly opposite and pure, not connected to the drives at all. Just connected to some immortal soul. You see this in Diotima's speech. She says, we come to know the very essence of beauty in the beautiful itself, which makes life worthwhile to live. For this essence is pure and unalloyed, not infected with the flesh and colour of humanity or mortal trash. It is virtuous, good, and the truth. So she's not claiming I'm just making this stuff up because it could have positive effects on us. She's saying this is truth. So this is where Nietzsche warns us about the dogmatic error setting in. All right, so I've put some Nietzsche in there. This could be a proto-Christian devaluation of the earthly natural world, right? However, suddenly there's a crash at the door, and I've gone to Lacan here, where for Lacan, after Socrates' fascinating mirage about this ladder of love, and however fascinating all these beautiful stories appear, we are torn away from any world beyond, as the entry of a drunken man, decked in garlands and himself a feast, is enough to bring us back to it as it really is. Enter Alcibiades. All right? This is a famous representation by Anselm Feuerbach, 1869. Alcibiades, Agathon, the host, he's just won the contest at the festival of Dionysus. As a poet, Socrates, deep in thought, perplexed, like philosophers often are. Lacan saying, this is when reality comes crashing back in after these fascinating stories. Socrates looks worried. He enters drunk, more drunk than the others, I should say. Unexpected, no one knew he was coming. And he wasn't expecting Socrates there, and it creates an awkward instant. Why? Because Socrates was said to have been the first who had loved him, protos erastes. He was always trying to sober him, teach him wise restraint, be a moral example. Alcibiades, don't drink so much, don't party so much, be more moderate in your behaviour. Alcibiades is this brilliant young Athenian general, brilliant but of wild repute. He's sort of like the it boy, considered very handsome, a lot of sex appeal, plenty of older male suitors always after him, and yet he chose Socrates, which really confused all the aristocracy of Athens. They get into a bit of banter. Socrates and Alcibiades accuse each other of jealous stalking. Oh, don't get me talking about love. Socrates will pounce on me. And Socrates is saying, yeah, me, look at you. There's a bit of a banter going on. And so Eryximachus, the doctor, says to Alcibiades, well, why don't you give us your speech on the question of love then? You tell us what love is, since we've all had a go. And Alcibiades says, well, why don't I do a tell-all and tell you about Socrates' way of loving? So, drama aplenty. Notes on Alcibiades. A comment by Nietzsche. These enigmatic men destined for victory and seduction, whose most beautiful expression is found in Alcibiades and Caesar, and among artists perhaps Leonardo da Vinci. What does Lacan say about Alcibiades? He stresses the stature of the historical Alcibiades, a political pre-Alexander, star qualities akin to a modern-day Kennedy, James Dean, Brigitte Bardot, etc. in one. I've got to throw Brigitte Bardot in there because you've got to remember it's not a homophobic society, so men can be sort of sex objects for other men as well back in those days. Nietzsche, this is where Greek philosophy started, the beauty of Athenian male youths. The older guys wanted to impress them with their knowledge and wisdom. And it became a kind of mentoring program in Athens, in the democratic places. Victoria Wall, he was just a scholar pulled out of a classical journal. She says this homoerotic love of elder to younger was foundational to the democratic ethos of Athens. This is just a bit of a modern example of what Alcibiades, the kind of appeal he might have had. I've chosen Ben Cousins because he had that sort of sex appeal when he was playing, but he also had that sort of wild, hard-to-control aspect. And then as time went on, we all found out that he had a pretty serious drug problem. So he couldn't actually control himself. But in his time, massive appeal, and that upper body strength, that's got to be there. To be a top Athenian general, that's hand-to-hand combat, like shield and spear. So that's just to give you a bit of a sense of the physicality involved. So what's he say, Alcibiades? He tells his scandalous story of how he tried to get Socrates to have sex with him but was rejected. Socrates had initially pursued him but frustrated and confused him by never going to physical. This turns the tables of power. Alcibiades is confused. Why isn't he trying to do me? Aren't I as hot as I thought I was? Now Alcibiades is the one desperate and longing, He's the lover, and Socrates is the beloved now. Turns the tables of power until Alcibiades says, look, says to Socrates, connives to get him to spend the night, look, I'll give you the beauties of my body as a trade for the secrets of the beauties of your mind or soul. That's a fair trade, isn't it, in ancient Athens, considering the context? Fair trade. And Socrates says, don't worry about me, just look to your own soul and stop trying to trade in brass for gold. So you see how Socrates does not value the physical or the sexual at all. He uses the beauty just to sort of turn the tables of power and get people to look to their own soul and develop the spiritual side. So that's part of the erotic contest that Socrates brings to Athens. It's new. And it's sort of revolutionary. 2,000 years, this has almost been a paradigm for how to relate to the young. Alcibiades says he's messed up by this, though. It's against custom. Remember Pausanias. Read what Pausanias says about custom in ancient Greece. And Alcibiades turns to Agathon and says, watch out. Socrates does this to everyone. And Socrates interprets this, he interrupts, and he interprets this as the real reason behind Alcibiades' speech. Alcibiades stages this complaint to keep Socrates and Agathon, who's the other young, handsome beauty in the room, for himself. So he's a bit sceptical. Alcibiades, you just want everyone just for yourself. You want me to be your sole lover, and you want Agathon all to yourself. You want to keep him away from me. That's what this is all about. So, this is Socrates being the analyst of the transference. I know who likes who and what they're trying to do. That's the art of Socrates. Problems with Socrates. Does he deny nature too much? Should he allow more reality to the drives? Is it immoderate? Does he violate the Delphic maxim? He was an anomaly in relation to the other Greeks. He denied it more than other people there. So this is a question for us to consider. Lacan's even sceptical, says, well, who is this Socrates? He's a bit of a madman in a sense. He thinks he's on a divine mission to, prove to everyone that they know less than they think they do. He denies nature so much that, he gets his voice, and there's all these heroic stories that Alcibiades tells of when the soldiers were complaining about standing on watch in the snow, so he went and stood there in bare feet and did everyone's watch and just did not feel the light cold. And everyone's like in awe of this, especially Alcibiades, the younger Alcibiades, saying, what a man, But Lacan's saying, isn't there something a little bit detached, disembodied about that, to just stand in the snow all night in bare feet? Isn't it, maybe there's something a little bit excessive about that? Nietzsche seems to agree. It has odd psychological effects on Socrates, his over-occupation with morality. And he's known in ancient Greece as a kind of atopia, literally no place or nowhere man. And he seems to work this. He says, be careful, at the place where you see something, I am nothing. Wisest is he who knows what he does not know. He's eventually convicted of corrupting the youth, blamed for Alcibiades' excesses, because Alcibiades is always, exiled and recalled and re-exiled by Athens until they eventually lose the war. He's accused of trying to make the Greek religion Puritan. He insults the judges because his voice told him to. And he ends up getting executed by the famous cold, cruel cup of hemlock. There it is. This is not the last word on Socrates. This is just a brief tour de force. You can go back and read the Symposium, and we have a course, another subject on Plato and Socrates, and Nietzsche's critique of him as well, that you can do in later semesters. This is a famous painting by Jacques-Louis David. All right. Second recommended reading, Hawani. What is love? So in a sense, imagine that he's next to speak at the Symposium, right? He's gone back in a time machine and brought them all forward. He's going to get up and have his go. He's a contemporary philosopher in the North American academic scene. Chicago, I think, Chicago University of Liberal Arts, something like that. And he starts off by saying, the things we love are diverse. We don't just love people, we love objects. Usually the crap example of our iPhones. Activities, so, playing sport, doing philosophy. Ideas, the idea of morality or a good society or a good work of art. And people. And even then there's three types of people love. Eros, sexual romantic. Philia, friendship. Agape, altruistic universal. I've given you a quote by Stolero, who also, he thinks there should be a fourth category, storge, which means parental affection, which he thinks is a little bit different to the other ones. But Stolero, he sort of brings out that these are not wholly distinct, for he writes, these forms of love are most often complexly intermingled in the richest and deepest romantic relationships. For example, we may experience a lover fluidly and flexibly as an object of our erotic desire, and as our best friend, as our parent and as our child, as our brother or sister and as our soulmate, and in existential kinship as a fellow human being, which is agape. Hawani considers care or concern as what unifies all these types of love. No care or concern for the other, no love. Whether it's friendship, parent-child, romantic. If you don't care, it's not love. So that's what Hawani is going to say is the unifying theme. But still, he's going to try and find what are the generally necessary features that distinguish romantic love from the other. He grants what someone like Stoloroy would say. We can't completely separate and purify the categories and make them wholly distinct. But are there some generally necessary features of romantic love that we can say, yeah, that's romantic love? And so that when we talk about it, we know what we're saying and so does the other person. He eventually arrives at 16 key features, and there's a summary on them on page 27, which is the last page of the book, which will turn right way up. Make sure the letter's going up and not sideways. Features 1 to 7 are sometimes found. Note the sometimes. He's not being dogmatic, he's saying sometimes. Features 8 to 15, generally necessary. Not always there, but generally necessary. Feature 16, care, he says is necessary, but necessary and not sufficient, because other types of love exhibit care too, i.e. a parent cares for its child, an owner for their pet, a leader for his or her people, if they're a good leader, like Julia Gillard, right? And I've just dated this lecture forever now. It's all being recorded. And so if there is care, it doesn't mean it's automatically romantic love, because other forms of love have care. But if there's no care, it can't be eros. That's Hawani's final position, but he goes through like a lot of different arguments to arrive to this. So go through this, if you haven't already read it, and try and do the reading before the lectures, because that will just give you a full grasping of the material. You come here, you hear me crap on in the slides, it gives you a, you might raise from a 30% understanding to a 50, 60, questions in the tube, 70, 80% understanding, 90. That's when you get like the full benefit of the course, the way it's structured, plus all the homework. But along the way, he tries to answer the what is question, what is love, with the notion of emotion. Because Hawani is part of a kind of post-positivist society, right? We've had the scientific revolution, which overthrew the church's hold over government in the Western liberal world. So now we're all scientifically savvy. So we're not going to answer this question of what is love by reference to gods or myths. We're going to talk about concrete factors like emotion. That's sort of where Hawani comes from. Concrete factors, conceptual clarity, good logical constructions, right? That's Hawani. That's one way to do it. It's valid in its own way. Very valid. I like the myths too, and so do a lot of people, but this is still good. Romantic love is an emotion, he says. But what is an emotion? Doesn't this just like put the question back one step? Well, on page 18 it says emotion is made up of desires, feelings, thoughts, images, beliefs. But can't we just now say what are desires, what are feelings, what are thoughts, what are images, what are beliefs? And every answer he gives, can't we then say, but what are these? Aren't we just like bouncing around from one dictionary entry to another? There's a sense where we can get trapped in a bit of a circle. So why don't we go to the smaller biomolecular level? Love is about dopamine and endorphins and neurons doing this and genes, rods and cones in your eyes, detecting beauty, And sure, like that's all part of it. But if we try and reduce straight into that level, don't we alienate ourselves from the whole of our experience? When we fall in love with somebody, do we go up to them and say, the rods and cones in my eyes have bounced on the back of my retina, but that you have nice hair? And I like the sound of your voice. And I can feel my dopamine receptors raising to a certain level, which suggests that maybe we can go on a date. Wouldn't you just say, what the hell are you talking about? Who's that guy, Sheldon or whatever? What's that? Yeah, I don't watch it, but I've heard he's a bit like that, which is, it's the stuff of humour. Don't ignore that perspective, but don't try and reduce and eliminate philosophy and think all we need is that. It doesn't really work. That's called positivism or scientism. Not a very popular view in philosophy. Let's just make a general comment, right, to finish off. Generally speaking, love is an emotion. that's what Helwani would say, a partly sexual desire, because he gives counter-examples where people are in love but there's no sex anymore. Partly sexual desire or feeling involving certain typical beliefs, ideas, practices, care, right? These are just some general terms, general impressions I formed from reading the chapter, but you'll read it and find your own way, find your own things to seize on that make sense to you as a person.